live video talking about student mental health, and they asked me about the Ethan Crumbley case. And I did not realize that there was a Miller hearing going on. And so I definitely want to cover that here. I'm not going to play the whole thing. There was one particular expert that I was watching. Y'all know I like covering the mental health experts, and I believe it's a psychiatrist. We're going to start there and see what all we want to include. If y'all need a part two, let me know, and we might make this a multiple part thing. But let's hop right into the testimony.
I am, among others, I'm a member of the American Academy of Psychiatry and the Law, which is the professional organization related to forensic psychiatry.
Are you board certified in forensic psychiatry?
I am.
Can you please tell us what that means and why it's important?
Forensic psychiatry is the subspecialty of psychiatry that's particularly at the intersection of medicine.
All right. So to me, she does a phenomenal job with her testimony. Y'all know I have covered some other testimony that was a little okay. But for this one, she does a really great job, especially as she's getting questions from Ethan's lawyer about why, because I believe her finding is that there was no mental illness at the time of the crime, despite the fact I believe he's been diagnosed with major depression. And a lot of things sound really troubling. I'm not sure because I haven't gotten through the full thing yet if she talks about that he might have been exhibiting some antisocial type traits, because often those aren't covered when we're talking about mental illness. But this is a Miller hearing, which is from Miller v. Alabama. I am not a lawyer, I'm a psychologist. I had to look that up. But it's a hearing that says that minors can't automatically receive life in prison. And the judge is going to be sentencing him coming up. But let's dive right into her testimony. I'm going to skip forward a little because, yes.
We'll move to amendment 66 as well as move to qualify this witness as an expert in the field of forensic psychiatry.
Any objection to items?
Okay.
Thank you. With that, People 66 is admitted into evidence. This witness will be reflected as a witness in the, as an expert in the area of forensic psychiatry.
Thank you, Judge.
You're very welcome. May continue.
Thank you, Doctor. Do you always author a report after conducting a forensic examination?
I do.
And when you write that report, do you document the materials you review and coming to your conclusion?
I do.
Would that be the best practice, you know?
I would say so, yes.
Why is that?
It's important when the readers of our report, which are typically attorneys and judges, that they know where our opinion came from and what we relied upon to come to our opinion.
Yep, we've seen that in other cases.
To know and use the reference when we're speaking about our opinion.
Doctor, are you familiar with the defendant in this case?
I am.
Did you evaluate him in your capacity as a consulting forensic examiner for the forensic center?
I did.
And when was that?
I evaluated him on March 15th, 2022.
What was the purpose for that?
I saw him at that time for an evaluation relative to his criminal responsibility.
Did you prepare a report?
I did.
May I recommend, sir?
Yes.
And admitted as people 64. Doctor, do you recognize that?
I do.
And what is that?
This is my report regarding his criminal responsibility dated March 29, 2022.
Okay, you authored that report?
I did.
This is Defense Exhibit N as in Nancy. This is a report authored by Dr. Colin Kane in June of 2023. You've seen that before.
I have, yes.
Doctor, I would like you just to have all three of those exhibits next to you, and if you need.
Okay, so I believe he's going to go into differences between her findings and the other doctor, which is going to be really important for the judge because these are both experts. I think one is a psychologist and she is a psychiatrist. Both are able to do forensic assessments. Typically, psychologists do testing. And so later she is going to talk about why she didn't do testing, but let's keep going. She comes across incredibly credible. We talk about agreeing with opinions. It sounds like Ethan did experience significant neglect. It does sound like there was a lot that was going on. And hearing some of the things a little bit later, it sounds like on the day of the incident, he got into a bad argument. None of these things excuse his behavior. And then I also saw some video of his behavior after the arrest, which was just very erratic and just, I don't know what decision I would have come to. This is why I do clinical psychology. I do not do forensic. With forensic, you really have to dig deep into what was the person's state of mind, what evidence do we see of any mental health issues before, because the defense is going to try to say that he was exhibiting psychosis before this incident, before the Oxford incident, and she is going to say that there isn't collateral evidence of that. We'll keep going.
He's recruited them for any reason, just please let the court know. Now, the purpose for the evaluation that you conducted and Dr. Colin King conducted were different. Is that correct?
That's
Okay.
correct.
But they did in fact address many of the same issues. Would that be right?
That's correct.
Now, in your report, it appears that the sources of information that you relied upon span the first 6 pages of Exhibit 64. Is that right?
That's right.
Now, Doctor, were you able to listen to Dr. King's testimony on August the 1st of this year?
It was.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but according to your report, Dr. King's testimony, it appears that you reviewed all of the information that Dr. King reviewed, aside from some self-reporting that the defendant made to Dr. King. Is that right?
That's my understanding, yes.
Now, I want to address a few points in Dr. King's testimony in his report and ask you to agree or disagree. So, first, Dr. King testified that the defendant is without question someone who is mentally ill. Do you recall that testimony?
I do.
And that was in fact in his report. Is that true?
That's true.
And in Dr. King's report, he was referencing the Michigan statute defining mental illness. Is that right?
That's right.
Do you agree that this defendant needs a statutory definition for someone who is mentally ill?
I don't.
Could you please explain that?
Yes. I want to start by saying that the common conception of mental illness, for example, if someone has anxiety or depression, that's different than mental illness that is defined by Michigan statute. My understanding of Michigan's definition of mental illness is that it is a substantial disorder of thought or mood that significantly impairs someone's judgment, behavior, capacity to recognize reality, or ability to cope with the ordinary demands of life. So in my earlier example, someone who has anxiety or depression and looks to a therapist might not meet criteria for a statutorily defined mental illness because it doesn't rise to that threshold of a substantial disorder of thought or mood.
So I hear what she's saying. And the only thing, once again, I'm not a forensic psychologist. Just looking at this case, hearing some of the testimony, seeing everything that happened, it seems like this was a student that was crying out for help, and there were multiple things that were missed along the way. I will be very interested in seeing what happens with his parents' hearing, because they were the ones that were really most able to get him help and support. The school, I think, was saying, hey, there's something not right. Hey, there's something going on. He's making these statements. He's saying these things, because later it's going to come out that he was fascinated with violence and that started around, I think, 8th grade. But it was in a way that if it had been brought to somebody's attention, they might have said that he's at risk for acting on some of these thoughts. That with any type of risk assessment, that there might have been, like, he could potentially act on what we call homicidal ideation, that he might have acted on some of those thoughts. It also came up that he also had some thoughts of self-harm in the past, and I think there was like an attempt. That's going to come out later. And so the fact that she's saying that he didn't have a significant mental illness, I'm hearing what she's saying in her testimony. Like, she is 100% presenting her opinion in a way that I think comes across incredibly credible. As a psychologist, I don't know if I would have agreed, just based on the history and based on some of the other things that I've heard. And I think the defense is going to present as well. If I could guess, I would think that the judge is probably going to sentence him to life in prison. I don't know if the judge would be lenient because of the mental health stuff. Supposedly he has made some improvements in jail, but I don't know what the judge is going to do in this case. The reason why they have some of these things in place is because children, their brains are not fully developed until really 21, but we really protect under the age of 18. And they just want to make sure that kids aren't over punished because of the fact that they don't have that fully developed brain. Not an excuse, just some legal protections have been made for children for that.
Now, the statute doesn't specify which disorder automatically meets criteria, but the notion of a substantial disorder of thought and mood is thought to apply most readily to something like psychosis, which is a gross impairment in recognizing realities, or to something like a major mood episode, like a manic episode or a profound mood episode. So in this particular case, I took all of the data that
I think the defense will probably try to argue that he was having a severe depressive episode, possibly with psychotic features, but that they're definitely thinking that he was having a severe mood episode at that time. I think that's what the defense is going to say.
have available to me, including the defendant's report to me during our multi-hour interview, as well as all the information that I listed, to come to a conclusion that he did not meet criteria for a substantial disorder of thought or mood, specifically at the time of the shooting.
So doctor, somebody could actually be experiencing internal crisis or symptoms of depression and still not meet the definition of mental illness, certainly not psychotic, is that right?
Correct.
Doctor, you report when the defense played the videos of the defendant in the Oakland County Jail. That was defense exhibit S and Susan.
Those were the videos. I don't know if they're going to play it here. I saw it. It was, yeah. Law and Crime has that up on their channel. Yeah.
First of all, did you know that incident, those videos were depicted from one incident in particular?
I was told that, yes.
Okay, that was from May the 26th of 2023, which would have been
Oh, okay. So when I watched the videos, so I just watched the video without any context. So when I watched those videos, I thought it was at the time of the incident. I didn't realize that that was from May of this year. Okay. I didn't realize that.
about a year and a half after the defendant had been locked in the Oakland County Jail after the murder. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Dr. King testified that those videos were evidence that the defendant was in throes of psychosis. What do you make of those videos?
So those videos were taken from an incident in May of 2023 of this year. So those videos tell us about the defendant's mental state during that one incident in May of this year. It tells us nothing about what the defendant's mental state was like in November of 2021 when the shooting occurred. Now, whether the defendant has developed depression or an adjustment disorder, like the jail psychiatrist testified, in the year and a half that he's been in jail in a cell by himself,
That would be common.
it's possible. But I do think it's important to note that the jail psychiatrist who has been seeing the defendant during her testimony still noted that the defendant was not psychotic and did not treat him for a psychotic disorder, even after those videos occurred in May of 2023.
That's
Doctor,
important.
you're referring to Dr. Gadar, who testified in, I think, July the 28th of this year, is that correct?
Correct.
And of course, you were in court for that testimony?
Correct.
And you reviewed her record as well?
I did.
Now, specifically, Dr. King testified that he diagnosed the defendant with major depressive disorder, severe with psychotic features.
That was-
Do you agree with that diagnosis?
I don't.
Tell us why.
There are several reasons. I want to start by saying that when we try to diagnose someone in a forensic assessment, or when we're trying to decide whether someone meets criteria for that statutory definition of mental illness, we like to rely on multiple sources of data. Now, there's subjective data, and then there's also objective data. And an example of a subjective piece of data would be the defendant's self-report. It is an important piece of data that we consider, but it is subjective. It's their own experience of what they were going through. Now, an example that might help people understand is if you go to your doctor and you walk in and you say, I have pneumonia, you would expect that that doctor would do more than just take your word for it. You would expect that they would use their clinical judgment and their expertise to determine whether what you're saying actually meets the clinical diagnosis that you think you have. And it's the same way with mental illness. So if someone says they have hallucinations, we need to do more than just take that at face value. We need to use our expertise as well as all the other data that we have in a case to determine whether that's true.
So doctor, if I could interject, that doesn't mean that he didn't tell his friend, that he didn't tell his parents. It just means as a clinician, we want to do further investigation before you get an actual diagnosis.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, so what they're getting at is the difference between somebody saying that they're hearing something and then doing a clinical assessment to see does this meet criteria for psychosis. I've done this a lot of different times, especially for individuals that have experienced trauma. Sometimes with anxiety, we get these altered states that where I've worked with clients that did hear things, but it was only in that heightened anxious state or only late at night. It was more of it was connected to their trauma in a way that wasn't purely psychotic. It didn't happen when they were calm or when they felt safe. It didn't happen at these other times. And so I typically didn't diagnose that as psychosis. I did say we need to keep an eye on it. It's troubling. We need to watch this, but that let's see what happens if we resolve the trauma, if that also resolves the hearing voices or whatever the perceptual experience that the individual is having.
Correct. And so my understanding of Dr. King's diagnoses is that he relied on the defendant's self-report and what he self-reported in text messages, for example, as well as on a variety of psychological tests that he conducted, the majority of which were self-report checklists to come to that conclusion.
So things like the MMPI.
Now, when I decided whether or not he had a statutorily defined mental illness, I took into account what the defendant told me and those text messages that were referenced. But I also looked at the more objective data that we have in this case, and there's actually quite a lot. So, for example, objective data would be something like the videos of his defendant immediately after the shooting, during the shooting, in the substation, and in those videos.
From what I remember, he seemed calm. That's what I remember. I could be getting things confused, but let's see what she says.
There's no evidence that the defendant was objectively exhibiting signs of psychosis during that time. So what we see in those videos is that the defendant was communicating clearly, he was calm and collected, he was answering questions relevantly, suggesting reality-oriented thought processing. What we don't see is any signs of bizarre behavior, disorganized speech, responding to internal stimuli.
Can I ask you just right there, what is internal stimuli?
When someone's actively hallucinating, the clinical term that we sometimes use is responding to internal stimuli. So,
and I don't know if she's going to give an example, but sometimes I've had people that we were having a conversation, then all of a sudden and then I check in to see what happened in that moment. Now, that could be just distraction. That could be a lot of different things. Just because somebody does that does not mean that they are hallucinating. But you typically see the person and you realize they're responding to something that I can't see or hear in this space or in this room.
Imagine that you're hearing a voice or seeing something that other people can't see or hear. That would be distracting. You might be looking around, trying to figure out where the voice is coming from. You might be talking under your breath, responding to this voice. You might be looking around, seeing something that other people can't. In none of these videos does the defendant appear to be doing it. Now, that would be incredibly atypical to present with none of those signs that I mentioned if someone was in the midst of an acute psychotic episode.
Okay, so once again, her opinion is at the time of the offense, he did not meet criteria for significant mental illness. I want to skip ahead to the defense because that gets a little bit more heated. To me, the defense is leading a lot. I don't know if they can't object for lead because the defense is like pretty much just reading off. Did you know this? Did you know this? Like it's a lot of, but I guess because it's cross, I guess you can do that. I'm not a lawyer, so, but it just seemed like there was a lot of just asking her yes or no questions to if she had seen certain things. Maybe that's normal. I don't know. Okay, so this is into the defense's cross, and she's just going to ask her a lot of questions. You'll see what I was saying by she's just going to get a lot of yes or no. Did he say this? Did he say this? Did he say this? Why are you saying, or she doesn't, that's not exactly how it's phrased, but just trying to get an idea of her opinion for why this doesn't meet criteria for significant mental illness.
Friend left, correct?
Correct.
And it was a somewhat sudden departure.
Yes.
Okay.
And he told you that without B, I had no friends, no social contact, and I hated school, correct? Correct. He told you that his mom understood that he was upset because he started acting differently. Correct.
Being upset, especially about a friend, maybe not talking to me anymore, doesn't necessarily mean that the person has this other thing. This is my annual place to stop and say, just because someone has mental illness does not mean that they are going to do crimes. Individuals with mental illness are more likely to be victims of crimes than to do them. And also that things like psychosis, incredibly treatable, that there are things that can help. The issue can sometimes be finding the right medication, the right dosage, so that a person isn't sedated or over medicated, or that they're not under. Sometimes compliance with medication can be an issue, but these things are treatable if someone is exhibiting, psychosis, or if they do have significant mental illness. That doesn't necessarily mean that they'll do crimes.
That his mother said they were going to mess with B and that he won't want to be my friend anymore when he comes back. They would manipulate his brain. Correct. Even if he did come back, he thought that B would not want to be his friend. Correct. He told you he had no one to talk to, so that's when he turned to his journal and his cat. Correct. You then go over, I think, what you call planning. He had told you that he had planned the shooting in his head, but that he never thought he would ever get that far, correct? Correct. He tells you when he got the gun, he was like, I have it, let's do it. And I was like, it's a crazy idea, but it just kept coming. Correct. Now let's talk.
Those thoughts are more intrusive thoughts, not necessarily psychosis, not necessarily what they're talking about meeting criteria. Now, and two experts are going to think two completely different things. They really will. But once again, I think she's doing a good job defending her position. She's going to say more, but after she stops doing like the yes or no. And maybe this is from either the testimony or from her report. I don't know what she's reading from, but let's go.
Talk about the day before the shooting. He told you that he brought a live round to school and actually showed his classmates, correct?
Correct.
He told you that he wrote in his journal that he was going to do the shooting the next day. And while writing in it, he was so sad that he cried on the book, put his head down and cried in class, and no one noticed, correct?
That's what he told me, yes.
He also told you that he felt like the thoughts to shoot the school was as if I was a prophecy of my future and I had to fulfill it, correct?
Correct.
You gave us your definition of delusions, and it's your opinion that that is not a delusion, that he had to fulfill a prophecy?
No, because again, those are words that he used, but at no time did he ever tell me that he shot the school because of a prophecy. He wasn't saying that, he was saying it was like a prophecy. Again, it's different having a fixed belief and using a turn of phrase to describe something.
Once again, I think she did a good job defending that. I did, based on watching and listening to some of the stuff with Lori Vallow, I do think there were some valid delusions, and I think she justifies a lot of that stuff. Seems like she still might justify some of those things based on, the statement that she gave. But in this case, she's saying that those types of statements, that is not a delusion. And that someone experiencing a delusion would be like, I shouldn't go to jail because I fulfilled this like they would have a deep belief in the prophecy, or like there would be a different religious theme if this was a religious-based delusion.
So he told you that he was looking up bullets at school, he was called to the office, and he was never asked if he had access to the gun, and they let him go. Correct? Correct. He stated that day he was walking home and he began to think, no, I'm not doing this. B may come home and the girl I had a crush on might like me. Decided that he was not going to do it. He had good thoughts about not shooting the school, and those began working. Correct?
Correct.
And then he details he gets home and unfortunately he has a very difficult night because there was a horrible argument with his parents, correct?
Correct.
His dad called him lazy. And he just,
Yes, yes.
I apologize. And he described to you that they had had arguments in the past, but this one was really, really bad.
Correct.
And he stated to you that the thoughts of the shooting came back in an instant. Correct. And the good feelings he had when walking home just evaporated.
Correct.
So he describes the morning of the shooting. He told you he woke up feeling sick, like he had the flu.
Correct.
He actually went to the bathroom to puke, but nothing came out.
That's what he told me, yes.
He told you that he walked to school. He was quiet and sad.
Correct.
He told you that he was typically putting all of his bad thoughts in his notebook where no one can see it, but on that day, he drew it on a piece of paper so his teacher would look at it.
Yes, exactly.
And he told you that part of him wanted to get caught, the other part didn't want to, correct?
Correct.
Then he described the moments leading up to the shooting. And he told you the thought, you asked him, I think, what was in your mind or what were you thinking about as you exited the bathroom?
Yes.
And he told you his thoughts were, don't do it, don't do it. You are not going to do it.
Correct.
And then he describes to you that he started firing the weapon.
Correct.
He told you he wasn't even looking at the people.
And I think she would view that more as just his internal voice saying not to do it, his conscience, that type of thing, and not that that was a psychotic moment or the fact that he still did it, that wasn't like him saying that something else took over his body or somebody else did it, that he was still fully aware of his actions at the moment. And so,
He was looking at his hand, correct?
That's what he said, yes.
He also described the scene in the bathroom at the very end of this incident. And he tells you after shooting the person in the bathroom, at that moment, it came back to me, like what I did, correct?
That's what he said.
the lawyer is trying to present this in a way to make it sound like it's psychotic. And even the things she said, for me, I might have maybe thought, was there some depression? But I don't think there would have been anything that would have said that he didn't know right from wrong or that the mental illness was so significant that, yeah. Now, I think he should have been in treatment. I think those things could have been helpful. I also think there might be some conduct disorder, antisocial type traits because they talk about him, with animals, that was a way that he tried to not have those types of thoughts, which I will skip ahead to that portion where she talks about that after we finish this right here.
Yes. And he told you that the second person was scared and I felt bad, like Jesus Christ. I said, I can't do this. So I escorted him out of the stall. I didn't want to hurt him, but I didn't want him to attack me. And I told that person he could go, correct?
That's what he said, yes.
He then told you, my thoughts came back, like, what have I done? So I walked out of the bathroom, correct?
Correct.
Unloaded the gun and put it on the trash can outside of the bathroom.
Correct.
He saw the police and he surrendered.
Yes.
You spent some time going over like remorse or regret or feelings like that. And he told you, I felt like I had to say I was remorseful when it first happened, but that's what I actually feel now.
Yes, that's what he said.
Now, there's a large section in your report.
And the fact of him not having remorse at the time of the incident, that might be, like I said, more indicative of that conduct type thing, if he truly didn't have it at the time.
Psychotic process, but then he believes he has to fulfill a promise.
Again, I think the wording is very important, counselor. So he's saying it's as if I was having a prophecy. That's a turn of phrase. He at no point during the interview told me I had to shoot the school to fulfill a prophecy. He told me that he had been thinking about this for months and months, not because of a prophecy, but because he had been thinking about it. So when I asked him specifically, why did this happen? Were you hearing voices? Did you have any beliefs about it? He didn't keep referring back to this idea of a prophecy.
Yeah.
In my analysis, that's very much a turn of phrase and not a delusion.
Turn of
So
phrase.
obviously, when you begin your interviews, you explain to the patient why
she's
you're
gonna-
there and the purpose of the interview.
She's going to get into, did he not understand what the words were? Let's skip ahead.
I want to talk about, your comment about the violent thoughts. You stated that violent thoughts have been present since preschool, I'm talking about page 67. And he had previously dealt with them in other ways instead of carrying out a mass shooting. So you list that he dealt with those violent thoughts by playing video games.
This part gets a little triggering for animals. Okay, so this is my warning. Yes, that's my warning. And it can be indicative of conduct and antisocial personality disorder, individuals that express these thoughts this way. So some people with obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, sometimes they get intrusive thoughts, sometimes they get intrusive violent thoughts. They do not act on those thoughts and they might find other ways to cope with it. It's incredibly distressing and they go to treatment for it. This just seems, especially with a history of neglect, which would kind of go on that developmental trauma route. That's where I wonder if there is just more conduct, antisocial type personality traits that are coming out. Antisocial personality can't be diagnosed until 18. And typically conduct disorder are some of the things that you see before that. Everybody with conduct disorder does not develop antisocial. And he didn't have like legal trouble, so I don't even know if he would have met the full criteria for conduct disorder either. And conduct disorder also would not be a diagnosis that would meet criteria for why somebody shouldn't be responsible for their behavior.
Killing animals and going to a shooting range or watching movies, correct? Correct. I need help understanding this because you say he does not fit the definition of having mental illness. And then you say he's been able to control these violent voices by killing animals. So he should have been able to stay home that day and torture a bird instead of doing what he did.
She got low.
So again, counselor, I understand it's very hard to imagine how someone who's sane can torture animals and who can commit mass murder. But the fact remains that they are, and they do. It's not everyone who tortures an animal, it does it because of psychosis or because of mental illness. It may seem completely horrible or illogical to people who are not in that situation.
And that's where antisocial means goes against social norms. Now, some people, they find healthy ways. So sometimes if you're looking for someone that is brings to the military or like to have certain jobs, you want a little bit of antisocial, a little against social norms, but that they found healthy ways to channel and manage that they're not out there, doing crimes, not following the rules. But sometimes people that go against the norm, go against those things, there are healthier ways to channel that than the types of behaviors and the things that he did.
But it doesn't automatically equate to mental illness. So the point I was making in this paragraph where I was talking about his ability to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law at the time of the offense, what we mean by that is, did he have alternative courses of action that he could have chosen instead of shooting the people at the school? And he demonstrated he had multiple alternatives. We might not agree with them, but he was able to deal with those urges in other ways rather than killing people. And that included killing animals. It's not great, but he was able to do things other than killing people, and he chose not to.
And he chose not to.
You stated in your report that Mr. Crumbley's comportment with police and jail staff following the shooting suggests that he is able to engage in appropriate behavior surrounding this period of time, correct?
Correct.
And again, I know we talked about this before, mental illness presents itself in many ways, correct?
Yes and no, counselor. If someone's acutely psychotic, that presents in a typical way. So yes, everyone is different, and anxiety might present differently than depression. But there are set things that we expect clinically if someone is acutely psychotic and who did not display any of it.
Okay. So I asked more specifically just about mental illness.
Sure.
So psychosis isn't the only type of mental illness. You would agree with me?
Correct.
Not everybody with debilitating mental illness is walking down the street and talking to voices. You would agree with me?
Correct.
Okay. And I believe you touched on this before. A psychotic episode doesn't last perpetually, correct? It's not forever.
Correct.
So someone may be having a psychotic episode and then return to reality.
Not in the way that this was displayed, no. Because again, without intervention, without some sort of antipsychotic treatment or psychiatric intervention, it would be very atypical for someone to be acutely psychotic and hallucinating and show no signs of that afterwards or in the days, weeks, and months following the events.
You testified earlier that there was no bizarre behavior. Is your testimony that shooting fellow students is not bizarre behavior?
Not in a way that indicates mental illness, no. Again, we're not saying that it's good behavior or that it's normal behavior, but not all murder, not all violence is attributable to mental illness.
So I think this particular forensic expert, she did a phenomenal job presenting things clearly, and she stood her ground when the defense was trying to, because the whole bird thing, that was just kind of random. But I think she was trying to get to her. And that's where I say when professionals get on the stand, no matter what the other side does, they have to remain professional, because she was probably a little annoyed at that question. And I think that was her every time she came back with the counselor thing, that might have been her. So counselor, like I could see that being her way of being like, please. But she did it in a way that was very professional to the court, very professional to this hearing. She didn't at all come across in the ways that we've seen a few other experts come across. And so if y'all would like more of this, let me know. Y'all know I have a full-time job, and so I don't always see when things pop up. So please comment, please let me know if there are things that are happening that you would like for me to cover. Please also remember that I always cover those things from a psychological perspective. Let me move this stuff. Who knows? What is this? Oh, it's it's not anything important. It's not something from like a children's hospital. Was this from my son? Oh yeah, allergist recommendations. We don't need those anymore. I'm random. So y'all know I enjoy just breaking down the mental health side of some of these court and legal proceedings. I will definitely be covering the parent portion. I do personally think they should be held responsible for not following up, for the fact I think that day the school asked them to come and pick him up and they said no. And nobody knew that he had the weapon and that he was going to do that day. If they had come to get him, I don't know that it would have stopped everything, because I think they would have continued to let him have it. They might have joked about the fact that he even brought it. Some of the dynamics of the things that have been reported are true. So I don't know what happened in that family. The things that I've heard sound concerning and just, huh. So these cases are hard to cover. I will do a multitude of things. Please be sure to check out, I did a video on student mental health. I'll make sure to link that here or here. And I just really enjoy providing this educational content. Thank you all for letting me know if things are helpful or not. Some people, hey, if you were looking for a different type of coverage, there are other psychologists, there are other people that do it. I like presenting things from this clinical perspective, just breaking down some things, making it easy to digest. And I'm often giving my live reaction, or if I have watched it, I don't have a ton of specific bullet points that I necessarily want to cover. I like to have it be more of a reaction type video. And so that's me. Subscribe if y'all want more. I hope y'all enjoy the rest of your day.